Hi, my name is Sam Johnson and I'm a voice teacher. Today I'm going to be reacting to and analyzing Jeff Buckley performing Grace live. Immediately I notice how big the instrumental sound is compared to how kind of gentle his voice is. Putting the two next to each other always makes them stand out in a way that's a little different than if he was being accompanied by just like a really light acoustic guitar. I think we'd perceive his voice a little bit differently just based on whatever's in the background. But it is interesting how he's not singing heavy like the background. He's singing really light. There's a lot of extra air kind of coming through. It's not necessarily like a super breathy sound, but if I was listening to this voice and trying to get like the most balanced phonation and just the most boring voice that I could, I'd probably want to work on making sure that there's a little bit less air getting through at this point. That said, whatever sound he's using, if it's repeatable and easy, is a fine sound. That's just the first thing that I'd want to make sure that he can do, so that this is a choice rather than just like what he has to do in order to make these sounds. And we know that Jeff is brilliant and he's choosing to do this on purpose, so I'm just going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. Now, as soon as he starts leaning into the sound a little bit more, where it's more of a clear sound, we don't hear as much of that breath, but it sounds just as easy as the sounds before. You can hear a little bit more of that breathiness on that cries. It's interesting, he just goes back and forth. But when he adds in more voice, when it's more of that full voice sound rather than that almost raspier breath sound, it sounds just as easy. I think that sometimes if people were trying to add in rasp or extra breath or something at the beginning, as soon as they start leaning in, it's very possible, very likely actually, for it to kind of grab and become like too intense and too tense. With him, it just is that nice, boring middle place. It's awesome, which proves that that is an effect because he's able to go back and forth between them so easily. It is kind of hard to hear with this recording exactly. It's not mixed with his voice as forward as I think I'd like to give like really, really strong opinions. Yeah, it's just an effect, that raspy sound. It's just a little bit of that extra breathiness, but in a way that's controlled and predictable still. So good vocal technique isn't the same for everyone. Good vocal technique is what your body is able to do repeatedly, so you can do it all the time. You're not gonna wreck your voice by doing it, and that's predictable. You know what's gonna come out of your mouth before you start making the sound. With him, this seems really predictable. He knows exactly what sound he wants. It seems repeatable because it's not like a super extreme sound. It's just a slightly unbalanced, but unbalanced on purpose sound. And he's countering that by not like grabbing. If he started grabbing and getting really tense with that extra breathiness, then that tension I think would stack and make it less repeatable. But the way that he's doing it, everything just sounds super easy. We both might go tomorrow. It sounds like he might be engaging a little bit of extra jaw, introducing some tension to try to get an effect from it. When he starts doing this little flippy thing, it's like a tension and release where we hear a little bit of that extra energy, and it does sound more tense than what he was doing just a few measures before, and then he completely lets go of that tension in order to get a very free falsetto-y sound. And he's just jumping back and forth between the two, which is kind of like a yodel. So again, is this repeatable? I think yes. I think you can introduce a little bit of that and go back and forth when you're as skilled of a vocalist as what he is. So just because, yeah, like there might be a little bit of extra tension doesn't mean that we need to like remove all of that and really focus in on it. It mostly just shows that he's using this for the effect because he was again able to go back and forth between all of these things. So I'm really just seeing like the versatility and predictability of his voice where nothing sounds out of place yet. And if I'm able to listen to a piece that nothing seems completely out of place, then I'm like, cool, that sounds like some pretty good technique. Yeah, just tense and release. You can't get a high B to sound like that if you're just pulling chest voice up like crazy. It sounds so angelic as he goes up to that high note where it's just kind of floating up there, and we've got the connection still. It's not like he's flipping up into falsetto when he goes up to that high note. It just sounds so delicate and well controlled. That time when he was on the F, right before he slid up to the G, you could hear it wasn't as like free sounding. It's again just introducing a little bit of tension, maybe moving your passaggio up a little bit so that we're bridging higher in order to get a more intense sound on the G. So if you start one of these lower notes with a little bit too much additional tension or just the sense of like holding on, where maybe for perfect technique, we would let that bridge a little bit earlier and let everything start rolling up into your head a little bit earlier or whatever. With this, he's holding on to that on purpose. It still is moving into his head. I think that he's a good enough singer that he's not gonna like mess up in really, really big ways. Everything just sounds way too controlled. So he still is letting his good technique come in, but it's looking at it on a spectrum of like, how light is this sound and how heavy is this sound? And maybe for a perfect bridging experience, I'd look for a 5. And I would put that at like a 7 or an 8. That's a pretty heavy sound, to the point where like sometimes if we hold on to too much of that heaviness of the weight, when we go higher it becomes harder. With him, I didn't see that. It just was like, oh my gosh, that's a much more intense sound than when he approached it in a slightly lighter way just a minute ago in the song. And then progressively, as he started letting more of this like whiny kind of thin sound come into the sound as he went higher, which then let his vocal cords thin out a little bit more, stretch out a little bit more, let go of that weight that he was holding on just for an effect. And we get this really cool movement through that phrase, through that melisma, where it's not the same all the way through. It's not boring. And a lot of times when people do a held note that's just one note, or even a lot of times when it's multiple notes, like what he just did, they just keep it the same all the way through, and it gets so freaking boring. Like if you're holding a note out and you don't change anything about the tone or anything about the volume or anything about anything as it's going on, it's gonna sound boring, and it's actually gonna start sounding super flat. With him, everything was changing the entire time, and I think that that helped him technically, but also just was so much more interesting to watch than if he had the exact same vowel and he just moved through everything and it was the exact same volume. Just don't be boring. I really wish that his voice was easier to hear in this recording though. Or mixed a little bit more heavy with him. It's like his face and the sounds coming out of him don't match up, because his face is like this, and the sounds coming out of him is this amazing soaring B. It's just like a hard note to sing, but because for him singing is easy, it doesn't look hard. It kind of lets down some audiences. A lot of people, I think, are conditioned to think that good singing looks really challenging. It doesn't have to look really challenging, because it doesn't have to be really challenging. So if we can get to the point where you're able to make these sounds predictably and repeatably, and it's super easy, it probably doesn't even feel like much just pouring out of him. You know, that's good technique. That's really, really good technique. He's got good technique. I forgot where I was going with that last section. Sometimes if people are expecting it to look hard and it is super easy, you need to almost introduce a little bit of like difficulty and funny face on your face so that people can get what they're expecting. I think it's in one of Melissa Cross's DVDs. She's like, then just make your face look really intense, because the screams that they were doing don't really feel like much. And so you need to kind of fool the audience into having that sense of intensity. With him, you know, that just wasn't what he was looking for at that point. If he wanted people to be like, oh my gosh, here's that B again, I would probably try to make your face look a little bit more insane. But that's more of a performance technique type thing, rather than, is he still able to make that sound without making the face? Yes. These are the weird kind of things that you have to start asking yourself when you're good enough to be in his situation. I don't love the head shake when he gets to the vibrato, but everything leading up to that is like just as easy looking as what everything else was in this song. But then he starts introducing this like rasp, this intense kind of distortion on top of everything. But it looks just as easy because it's just a filter that he's putting on top of good vocal technique. You can see him when he starts getting a little bit more intense in this part, his mouth opens a little bit more in the same area. It just probably feels way more energetic as the singer, but it's just as controlled as everything leading up to this. And it's because he kind of prepared everything with that really amazingly well-balanced stuff that he's able to come in with these sounds that might tend to encourage more effort or more tension, and he doesn't have that effort or tension. Gosh, he is really good. He makes this look so easy because it is easy for him, but developing the technique and putting in all of the work to get to this place is not easy. It takes a lot of work. I don't love the shaking to get the sound, but it is creating like a pretty distinct, I wouldn't even call it a vibrato, it's like a tremolo, it's like a bullet that's just hitting you over and over. But I mean, if we had a more traditionally good vibrato on top of that, I don't think that it would have the energy or just the sound profile that he wants from this. So in order to get that, like, he is kind of introducing this weird tension, and he's just doing weird things, but it's working because it's predictable. So for people who are trying to get his sound, don't start with like that weird thing. Start with asking it to be easy, because that's what he did. Is he starts with all of these sounds that are super easy to make, that are really balanced, that are repeatable and predictable, and then he just gets really freaking intense on top of it and starts adding on all of these different colors. But if you start by trying to add the intensity and the colors, you're gonna have a really bad time. He's a really good singer. I think there's a reason that people put him so far up on their top rock vocalists ever lists, because he's one of the top rock vocalists ever. And just the control he does, the amount of emotion that he's able to put into his songs, because he doesn't have to care at all about technique, because it is so secure. It's amazing. Like, what else can you ask for? If I was wanting to change things around, it's really just like ultra picky and making sure that it's the exact sounds that he wants in the moment. Because, like, from my side, everything that he was doing was intentional, and why change it if it's intentional and repeatable? That is good technique. And I'm sure that there are places where he feels tense and where things might not feel 100% as easy as in other places, and that's where having just a really good relationship with a good teacher who can sort of help you problem solve any of those things would be useful. But do I think that he needs to overhaul everything? Absolutely not. I think that's one of the best vocal performances I've ever seen. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Go follow me on Instagram, because I'm being that guy now. Thank you.